Autumn Whitefield Medrano believes that we often accept as facts about beauty that aren't necessarily true. She's the author of Face Value, The Hidden Ways Beauty Shapes Women's Lives, and she joins us now to discuss her new book. Hi, Autumn.
Hi, Doris.
Autumn, you've spent more than a decade working for women's magazines, and also you have a popular blog called The Beheld. Mm-hmm. What inspired you to write Face Value?
It's funny, when I first started writing about beauty, I wanted to really know what other women had to say about beauty, because I had been working in women's magazines for so long, sort of in a behind-the-scenes position as a copy editor. And so I was hearing all this beauty talk and participating in it, but I wasn't directly creating messages about beauty. So I was an observer, and I liked that role. And so when I started The Beheld, I wanted to find out what women who had a unique perspective on beauty had to say. So I sought out everyday women, but also women who had a definite experience. Like I interviewed a nun, a little person, a burlesque dancer, some sex workers, fashion models, photographers, people who had an extraordinary insight into beauty. And that was a great experience. But the more I listened to them, the more I realized I had a lot to say myself. So those dual impulses are what led me to write Face Value.
And what makes you say that so many so-called facts about beauty are not true?
Well, it's funny. We have this, everyone has a relationship with beauty. We all look at ourselves in the mirror every day. And people who don't have the gift of sight, they think about beauty as well. I've yet to do a formal interview with someone who's visually impaired, but that's on the agenda. So I think from there, we all have ideas that we arrive at about beauty that are truths. And what I found is that both from a philosophical perspective and from a scholarly perspective, there are very few hard and fast truths about beauty. Like there's this idea floating around out there that beauty is somehow tied to fertility or reproduction, and that's not necessarily the case. Like people who are considered conventionally attractive aren't any more fertile than average-looking people or anything like that. So, but people will quote that as though it's scientific fact, and that's just not the case.
Just not true.
It's just not true.
Well, what sort of research have you done? Because I see in the back of your book several pages.
It's like 30 pages. It's basically a whole other chapter. The heart of the book really is interviews, because I wanted this to be a living book. And so, I interviewed dozens of women, nearly 100, I think.
Woo.
Yeah. And those range from, formal, in-depth, sit-down, hour-long, 90-minute interviews to, shorter talks. But also I did do a good amount of scholarly research, looking at academic journals and what other people who had an investment in beauty had to say about it. And what I found was that there was so much conflict. For every study, and this is true of a lot of areas of social science, for every fact that we find about beauty, there's another study disputing it. And so there are a few things that emerge as, I don't want to say fact, but that are closer to being fact than one study might say. But it was just fascinating to me that there was so much scholarly conflict about beauty, and that was lived out in women's lives. Women had this really contradictory, complex relationship with beauty. So it was interesting that it was mirrored in the academic research about it.
Give us a couple of examples of what you have learned about beauty from the so-called experts. Or that you didn't know.
Yeah. Things I didn't know. Well, it's funny. One of the things that surprised me the most was there's this idea floating around out there that the media is sort of universally harmful to women's self-images. That we look at these pictures of these impossibly beautiful pictures, that have been retouched and airbrushed for people who are professional beauties to begin with. And that most women who don't look like that will look at those pictures and feel bad about themselves. That it's not that there aren't women who feel that way, because I certainly have. I think most women have had that response at some point. But in fact, there's a lot of research indicating that sometimes those images have a response where women identify with that image and they actually feel better after looking at those images. That's not to say that those images are not problematic, because they absolutely are, and I don't want to lose sight of that. But looking at a more nuanced story about how we respond to media, really, I mean, that just intrigued me so much. And I didn't expect to find that, to be honest. So that was a big surprise for me.
How do women perceive their own beauty?
What I found was that there was a much more, women's relationship with their self-image was fluctuated a lot more than I expected. I thought I was unique in that, because I would look in the mirror sometimes and think, oh gosh, you're terrible. You're an ogre, you're a hobbit. And other times I'd look in the mirror and be like, yeah, girl, you got it going on. And there wasn't any rhyme or reason to it. It wasn't because I looked any better or worse on certain days. It wasn't even necessarily because of my mood per se. And I didn't know what it was. So I thought I was unique in that. In talking with women, I found that is typical, that it's easier to talk about how we don't like the way that we look. And so there's that sort of the narrative that has been spread that, oh, women, with so much, the beauty standard is so impossible to live up to. We don't like how we look. It's hard to feel good about yourself. But in fact, a lot of women have a much richer relationship with the way that they see themselves. So that was uplifting to realize that, in fact, I mean, I don't want anyone to feel like they have to feel great about the way that they look all the time. But it goes up and down. And it's comforting to know that somebody else feels the same way. Exactly. And that what I realized was that that means that neither of those things are true. Like, that like, if I look in the mirror and think I look terrible one day, that's not fact, because I know full well that 24 hours later, it might be a different story. So. Well, now, how does body image relate to self-esteem? That's a hard question. They are different psychological factors. Someone can have really strong self-esteem and still have a damaged body image, and vice versa. Your body image can be completely intact, and you might still have overall feelings about your self-worth, your self-value that are dampened. Body image really is just the way that in your mind you perceive your body. And so when we're talking about things like body dysmorphia, that's when the image that you have of your body in your mind doesn't match the reality. And I do think a lot of women have a slightly dysmorphic relationship with their bodies. That said, I think that most of us could pick out our bodies in a lineup too. So I think that women, this is just one example of the contradictory relationship we have with beauty, is that on one hand, we know exactly how we look. I can always spot myself in a photograph really, really quickly, and I think most of us can. On the other hand, sometimes I don't know how the rest of the world sees me. So, what does that mean about how I actually perceive myself? So, and as far as how that relates to self-esteem, what self-esteem does as far as body image and I guess appearance esteem overall, the way you feel overall about how you look, it's the most protective factor against not liking the way that you look. If your self-esteem is resilient, you're going to respond better to media images. You're going to respond better to the beauty standard. You're going to be more likely to use beauty tools like makeup and hairstyling really to please yourself, and because you want to use those tools to radiate confidence instead of cover things about yourself. So there's definitely a connection between self-esteem and appearance. What roles do the media play and the social sites in how women really visualize themselves? I tend to think that social media in particular runs the danger of increasing objectification, self-objectification, because when you're snapping all these selfies and posting them, you're looking at yourself a lot like this. You're looking at your phone. You become an object. And I'm 40 years old, so I did not grow up with all these techniques, and I didn't grow up with all this social media. So to me, it's still sort of new and it's different. And so I'm a little bit cynical about it. I almost want to say you're objectifying yourself, girls. That said, that's how I feel, because it is new to me. And I didn't grow up seeing myself as an object in my hand that I can manipulate. But when I talked with younger women, and I wish I'd talked with more younger women actually on this front in particular, they found that that social media allowed them to really have a flexible image, that they were able to showcase themselves in a bunch of different ways, that they were able to really present a multifaceted self through social media, because it wasn't just one picture of themselves that they were showing the world. Like when I was in high school, the thing that you did when you graduated was you had your senior portrait, and that was the portrait that stayed with you for the rest of your life, maybe, or, and maybe you would get married and have your wedding photos or something. But it was like one definitive image. And that's not true anymore. You graduate from high school, you have thousands of images of yourself that you can change every day on all your various social media outlets. And that, I think, allows young women and men to have a more comprehensive idea of how they actually appear.
Well, speaking of men, how will these guys benefit from reading Face Value?
It's funny, now that the book has been out for a couple of weeks, my hunch was that men would read it and would glean a deeper understanding about the women in their lives, their partners, their sisters, their friends. And I hope that that's true. But the response that I've had from men since the book came out is that they have a lot to say about their own relationship with beauty. I've been overwhelmed by the number of men who've reached out to me and said, like, this isn't just about women. This is about us too. Like, we think about these things, and they understand. Most of them understand that the pressures are different for men and women. But the language that we use about beauty, we still talk about men and the way that they look. It's different than how we talk about women. So they're really responding to it and interacting with the material, and I'm really pleased to hear that.
Well, I think that Face Value is a very intelligent book. Do you feel that our media has sort of dumbed down the subject of beauty?
Absolutely. I've been very fortunate in that this book has been treated, it's been appreciated for the nuances that I wanted to bring to the subject matter. Because that's really the heart of the book, is looking at beauty through a more nuanced light. Because we do tend to paint it as very either or. We tend to look at beauty. When we talk about beauty, we either treat it as a superficial, silly topic. Oh, those women's magazines with all their lipsticks and their eyeliners and hair tips you can use. Or we treat it as something, if we treat it in a more serious light, we look at it as something unfortunate. That, there's all this pressure on women to look a certain way. And what that means is that we're not giving serious thought to beauty in any other regard. We're not looking at how it affects women's friendships. We're not looking at how it affects how they interact in their romantic relationships. And that's really what I wanted to find out, was how beauty really affected women on a day-to-day level, and not just paint it as, it's unfortunate that there's this really impossible beauty standard for women to meet. I wanted to sort of put more of that serious thought into, why are we wearing lipstick in the first place? What is the drive there? So that was
right.
yeah.
What have you learned in your own relationships about beauty?
My personal relationships with other people? What I have found, it's a two-part question for me. In my friendships with other women, or not even friendships, just acquaintances or strangers sometimes, is that it's a really quick and dirty way to connect with another woman. Maybe I shouldn't say quick or dirty, because I do like connecting with other women about beauty. The quickest way to get to know a woman is, to say something about like her shoes or her lipstick. And that has a drawback, in that it assumes that women caring about these things is our universal condition. Not all women care about lipstick. Not all women care about shoes. But it is an easy way. It's an easy in. And I definitely exploit that. And what I've found is that has helped me create an immediate intimacy with women when I want to kind of get to that deeper level of conversation quicker. Because it's something personal. It's something relatable. And more often than not, if I say to someone, I love that lipstick shade, she'll tell me where she got it. She'll tell me the shade. She'll tell me three other shades she's tried. And then from there, we're getting to know each other. So that's how once I realized that, I've been using it left and right whenever I meet women. As far as how it affects my relationship, my romantic relationships, yes. I write about this in the book. I have always been plagued by this fear that whatever man I'm with, will one day wake up and find me unattractive, which is not grounded in reality. Most of the time, you know, people stay attracted to who they're with. It might diminish over time. And what I learned through doing my research was that that was not a reflection of whatever boyfriend I might have at the time. It wasn't even a reflection of me and how I felt about the relationship necessarily. It was a reflection of this extraordinary self-consciousness that was coming out in my romantic relationships, that all centered around looks. And once I realized that that was really sort of a smokescreen for other things I might want to pay attention to, I was able to use that. So now, like, I live with my boyfriend now, and I've found that if I am going through a phase where I'm feeling really uptight about how I look, and I, you know, might primp more than usual, even when it's just the two of us hanging out with our cat, and there's no reason to try to, you know, look particularly pretty, I ask myself what's going on. You know, I ask myself, am I nervous about something else with us? Am I trying to create intimacy? Am I trying to avoid having intimate talks about something that I might not want to talk about? And it's been interesting. So once I realized that about myself, I've been able to sort of be like, okay, wait, instead of putting on more lipstick, why don't you, you know, try to figure out what's going on here? So that's been a gift that I've been able to take from writing this.
Well, switching subjects a little bit, how did you become a writer?
I mean, I've always, like a lot of writers, I've always been attracted to words. I mean, I remember being 5 years old, and my favorite thing to do with my mom was we would create books together. I would tell the stories, and she would do the illustrations, and you know, they were silly, fun things. Words were just always a part of my life. I loved taking the dictionary off the shelf. And for some reason, I had the idea that I wasn't supposed to do this. I would take the dictionary off the shelf in the living room and would ferret it away to my bedroom, where I would just like look up words and read about them. And I just really like words and the texture of words and the nuances that each word brings to whatever you're trying to say. And that's why I became a copy editor, honestly, because it's more than punctuation. It's, you know, it's really finding the right word for the right moment. And so that was just sort of a gradual step then to writing.
Do you think that the blog helped you get published? I know that you self-published before, didn't you?
I on my blog, yeah, I hadn't, and my blog was absolutely instrumental to Face Value being published. My agent found me through my blog. Oh. She had just been reading what I was doing and reached out to me and said, I think you've got a book in you, let's talk. So absolutely, the blog was instrumental to this opportunity.
What are you working on now?
That's a great question. You know, it's funny, I had actually, writing the book was a long, engaging process. And by the time I was actually done with the manuscript, I was like, I think I don't know how many more words I have left in me. It was hard for me to blog. It was hard for me to get back to the thing that had energized me to write the book in the first place. But now that I'm done with writing the book and it's out and I'm talking about it, I'm finding myself re-energized to continue blogging. So for now, I think I'm going to sort of go back to my roots in a way and keep up with the blog and re-energize that. And I also started another blog on the Psychology Today website. And that's been nice in that it has a narrower focus, and that it's supposed to be about beauty, but about the psychology of beauty instead of more the sociological end, which is really more where the book comes in. So that's been fun for me.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I've promised myself come fall I'll come up with a plan, but I really don't know. I do know words will be a part of it because that's how I think, and that's how I relate to the world. And for me, there's no deeper satisfaction than finding the exact right words to say the right. Yeah. Yeah.
And do you still live in New York? Or?
I do. Yes. I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Autumn Whitefield Medrano, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
That's Autumn Whitefield Medrano, author of Face Value, just out from Simon & Schuster, and we highly recommend that book.
Thank you.